Hello and welcome to a new video format. We thought it'd be interesting to try a react to comments video where I basically read out the comments on the recent Foundations introduction video and try to respond to them, try to give my thoughts and feedback on them. This is going to be a little bit less structured video than normal and probably a bit longer. So stick around if you're into that sort of thing. We'll get started right away. So first comment, defending raids is difficult in particular for smaller guilds, and then adds a feature that benefits bigger guilds. Yeah, that might seem contradictory, but I actually don't agree that fortifications benefit larger guilds. They benefit all guilds equally by adding territory defenses. On top of that, there's an awesome feature that we didn't mention in the video yet, and that is that the cost of fortifications varies based on the quality level of the zone. So strong guilds that occupy a quality level 6 zone will have to pay a much higher price for their fortifications than guilds that occupy a quality level 1 zone. And that means that guilds, typically weaker guilds that are occupying these territories, will have access to the full territory defensive strength at a much cheaper cost in terms of resources. And I think that's pretty cool. That's going to make it easier to defend against stronger opponents coming from stronger zones. You guys better add new battle mounts for siege with the addition of walls. I want catapults, fire ballistas, rams, or even some magical ones. Well, we'd love that too. We did make the conscious decision not to include them in the first iteration of this update. And it's actually part of why this update is called Foundations. For me, it lays the foundations for future expansions of territory warfare with things like ladders, with things like catapults, rams, and all of these things. There is some challenge involved in designing these in a way where they don't only look cool, but they also perform a cool function and they add tactical depth. The dream for me, for fortifications, is that we end up with a different type of ZVZ fight that we've seen before. Having more reasons to split into multiple parties, having smaller dramatic fights on the edge of a Zerg, rather than just having this big army that primarily tries to hit each other in one point. And yeah, siege equipment could be really exciting for that. Some suggestions. Guards could be upgraded by feeding then equipment of a certain tier and literally food. Okay, so this is talking about fortifications. Yeah, I mean, guard upgrades probably won't be quite that complicated in the initial version. It would create kind of an imbalance in the crafting world if we decided on certain gear being needed for the guards, which is why it's probably going to be more simple. When it comes to static defense, it's similar to siege equipment. We discussed a lot, we even playtested a little bit, but this is something we want to add as a next step after we see sort of how the baseline of this update is getting played, hence the name Foundations. It's the foundation that we want to build epic siege battles on. Here's a comment. Exactly as you suspected, you just let it out and waited to see what would happen. I think this is referring to me saying in the dev talk that there were some concerns about raiding the way it would play out. Well, yes, to be fair, we think we've reached a point where we need to move forward with some things. We can't like stay concerned too much about everything in the game, because that would freeze us and put us in a place. So yes, we wanted to try something, we want to move forward. And yes, there is a certain feeling of getting back into sort of the alpha stage where we were experimenting, but that's the drive that I think will get us forward with Albion Online. Of course, we're being careful that we're not causing any kind of like permanent damage. We're doing things that are focused on seasons, but yes, we want to experiment, we want to try, and we want to move forward. Finally, stones will be worth it as a resource. Yes, I mean, that was one of the goals with the Foundations update. We did try to push the stone need of Foundations as high as we dared to make sure that this impacts the stone market. Whether we hit the right point, we will see. Because of course, the owners of the territory still have to feel that it's worth it for them to upgrade fortifications. But yeah, let's see if we found the right balance, and hopefully my stone gatherer character will be able to make some money again. On minute 4, they mentioned what I take as protection by the territory owner. Like, let's say I'm farming lots lots of things on the territory. I contribute to the territory through tax or other means. Would it incentivize them to let me farm there instead of straight up killing me? Yeah, that's the idea. So basically the reward chests in the territories will be filled based on the activity in PvE in the local cluster, so surrounding the territory. Any roaming mobs killed there, static dungeon content there will contribute to the value that's in the chest in the territory. And that means the guild that's playing there has a strong incentive to let you play there because they basically passively collect a bonus for you playing there. And while I don't think that will always lead to them letting you do that, because they probably want to have some of that content of their own, I think it will lead to cases where guilds are maybe not so aggressively killing people within their own region and rather looking for killing people in other regions. Please improve the roads of Avalon with an update to them throughout the year. They really need improvements to shine again for small-scale players. 242 upvotes. So yeah, a lot of roads comments on this video and a lot of focus on the roads. Yeah, let's get into that. So the main difficulty we have is defining what is small scale. Everybody has a different opinion on what is a small scale encounter. Or we typically joke, every group that has one more player than you is a Zerg. Yeah, that's actually a challenging thing, because when we look at the roads of Avalon, we get a lot of feedback that the roads are dead, the roads aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing for me. But we look at the data and we see a lot of activity in the roads. We see a lot of PvE activity in roads. We see a lot of PvP activity in the roads. And we see more than we had before the updates. So certainly the updates did do something for some players, well, for more players than before. And now we're faced with the challenge of figuring out how do we address the needs of these additional player groups that are apparently looking for a different kind of small scale. Because right now, what we see in the roads, if there is a group, so if there is more than one player grouped up, on average, there are 3 to 4 players grouped up, which we would consider an ideal small scale group size. 3 to 4 players engaging in roads content, sometimes maybe 5, sometimes maybe 3. But that's kind of a pretty good group size. So at the moment, internally, we're debating quite a bit how to address this topic that obviously gets a lot of attention and that has a lot of people unhappy. But at the same time, we're not quite sure what exactly people are saying to us when they say it needs to have more small scale. Some people in the comments here are saying it needs to have more focus on PvP objectives and have content for 5 to 7 players. Is that what we're talking about when we say small scale? Or do people actually feel that 3 to 4 players is too much and we're talking about just groups of 2 that should be the focus of the roads? Like I said, we're talking about this internally and we're thinking about possible solutions. The challenge, of course, is if you move this space into one direction or the other, so you make the objectives for larger groups or you make the objectives for smaller groups, you run the risk of making it less attractive to the players that are currently playing the roads. So I'd say our stance on a roads update is let's continue to talk about it. Let's figure out exactly what everybody's looking for, because we tried 2 times already and didn't apparently address the needs of this player group. And if we have that clear answer, we are absolutely happy to do a roads update. Until then, I would love to hear more precisely what are you looking for exactly when you say small scale. Avalonian roads are dead, no content, no players. We need solo dungeons back. We need loot from rare legendary chests back. Okay, roads are dead, no content, no players. We, again, cannot confirm that in the data. We do see an increased activity compared to the previous updates. So they're definitely not dead. We need solo dungeons back. Well, that's something we can talk about. I think there are some technical challenges with getting them back, but if that would make a huge difference, that's something we could consider. What surprises me about this, though, is that there aren't that many spawn positions for these solo dungeons. So this cannot be a large group of players that we could potentially entertain with these solo dungeons. And then we need the loot from rare legendary chests back. Well, the loot should still be there. Albion has a huge randomization in the loot. And of course, we've rebalanced various content in the roads with the charging up mobs and, different camps. So the chests don't work exactly the same way, but the loot is all still there. And we just redistributed it across the different content in the roads. You should be able to find quite valuable legendary chests there. Fix roads, too many zones since splitting the server and not enough content to keep players in the zones. Reduce the amount of maps and add tracking. That's actually a really helpful comment. That gets some specific points for what you're looking for with the roads. So reducing the number of maps, I guess you're looking for a higher player density, so more opportunities for PvP. And then not enough content would mean if we did that, we would have to increase the spawn rate for the content, which would be okay because we've cut a bunch of maps, so less reward gets constantly generated, so less risk for the economy. So that's all good. The only problem I see is if we reduce the number of road zones, we would also have to reduce the number of entrances in the world significantly, because otherwise we are creating travel networks that are way too powerful. Because if the smaller amount of zones have the same amount of connectivity to the outside world, you just have a much higher chance of getting the connections that you always need. Now, you would also have a higher risk of PvP in that, so transportation would become less safe. I think it's an interesting thought. We'll look into the actual number of players. But the reality is, of course, this would be restricting the number of people that are able to benefit from the roads as a content. And thus would particularly hurt the solo players, which is one big group that's asking for the roads to actually get pushed into their direction. So this is one of the challenges that we have to weigh, is think about how do we serve these different player groups. Maybe it makes sense to split the roads somehow into a content part that's aimed at solo players and a content part that's aimed at groups. Let me know what you think. We'll think about it as well. Buff solo dungeons again. Those definitely have been overtaken by other content. I mean, they do offer a high degree of safety. And I think that they actually have a pretty cool role to play there right now as, a spot for solo players in the open world to take a break from the sort of surface pressure that's there when you're out in the black zone. The constant risk of getting killed. I think they do offer a nice safe haven to take a break within your session and just have some nice PvE. But obviously people want to also have that content be playable continuously. It's something we're looking into. There will definitely be a buff for solo dungeons at some point, but we do want to first kind of find their exact role in the open world. And again, we have the difficulty that actually solo dungeons are one of the most popular contents being played. That might not be the opinion of the hardcore player group that really, really gets into optimized fame per hour and silver per hour rates. But a vast number of Albion players are enjoying the current content in solo dungeons and don't need them to be anything else at the moment, at least from what we can see in the numbers. I think making solo dungeons viable again would be good. The chest respawns could be optimized, but more rewarding exponential with each rarity and also balancing the rarity of the chest spawn. So let's talk about making solo dungeons viable again. Solo dungeons are a very safe type of content. They're not supposed to be competitive with things like Black Mists, right? They can't be, they shouldn't be, because they're way safer. We also don't like the idea of opening them up to PvP again, because we think the type of PvP that's happening in there isn't the good type of PvP. We want PvP to be about between people who have a fighting chance against each other as much as possible. And in the solo dungeon scenario, that is almost never the case. Very, very often, this content turned into just an ambush and slaughter. And that is what loses Albion players. And then in the end, kills the content. They have to have a balanced place in the world. Are they possibly a little bit too weak? Yes, we're looking into that. Should they be much, much better? No, they can't be. Because if they were, they would be outcompeting actual PvP content, which goes against the fundamental risk versus reward philosophy in Albion Online. Update suggestion for solo PvP. Add a passive sorting system with certain IP ranges while ignoring the IP given through capes and OC. Players would be sorted automatically, like Mists, where players only were 700 to 100, 1000 IP, 1000 to 2000, 1200 IP, 1200 to 1500 IP. This would be way more balanced than everything we have compared to corrupted dungeons and in the current state of Misc. Would you be okay with having rewards scale down if you're wearing lower IP? Because in terms of the risk and reward premise of the game, that is what would be needed. Otherwise, why would anybody be playing high IP in this content, right? So as long as the rewards are the same, all the players have to be matched in the same pool. We need more activities for single players. What are you looking for? What need for single players is not being served? We have, in my mind, the largest variety of activities for single players for any group, right? Like you've gathering, crafting, farming, all of these are solo activities. And then on top of that, you can go into the Black Zone on your own. You can go into the Mist. You can play Corrupted. There's a lot of stuff that you can do as a single player. What are you looking for specifically? Please, please, please work on solo dungeons and allow awakened weapons to drop as loot in solo dungeons. Well, awakened weapons can drop in solo dungeons. They can drop anywhere in the game. The requirement is that some player used an awakened weapon, they got killed, it dropped, and then it rolled for the chance of not getting destroyed, entering the loot pool. And from that point on, it can drop anywhere where you can get gear loot in the game. The awakened item can also drop. So solo dungeons already have it. Buff solo group dungeons or remove them entirely. Yeah, I think a lot of solo players would disagree with removing the solo dungeons entirely. We'll look into buffing them. Please add this stuff, I guess we're talking about fortifications, for faction warfare and capturing defending faction outposts. Faction warfare is cool and unique, but it gets boring over time due to the lack of depth. Let us build stuff for our faction. You know what? We had actually originally planned to have fortifications for faction warfare as well in this update. It turned out to be too much work. So we're going to launch fortifications for territories first and see how they play out. And then we'll be looking into adapting this content for factions, but that's definitely on our list because we also think it'd be cool to have that content accessible to the broader player base. It would be awesome to be able to faction flag at outposts, say you're faction flagged and want to do some corrupt dungeons or venture into the mists. When you do so, you lose your faction flag. And it'd be nice when you come out of the corrupt dungeon, if you could run to an outpost and flag up. The thing always to think about with these things is whether there is some exploit where you can do something by being able to flag in a different location. I can't immediately come up with something. So we'll check it. It might be a cool idea, it might make it more convenient. And we'll go on our list of things to do for faction warfare. Faction objectives. There could be an actual motivation to come first every month. Yeah, there's a challenge with the factions because unlike in other games where you're committing to your faction for life, in Albion you don't. You can change your faction. So the risk here would be that at the last moment, everybody would try to switch to the winning faction, which unfortunately makes designs like this tough. From my point of view, the update is incredible, but it would also be great if other aspects of non-lethal PvP would improve, such as the faction war, that war mounts could be used there. Yeah, I mean, war mounts are specifically not allowed in faction warfare because we do feel that they would overpower beginning players from being able to participate in that content too much. And generally, these battle mounts are prohibited in the yellow zone for a reason. I agree, though, it'd be cool to have, and maybe there's an opportunity to do that at some point. Hello, first of all, for all the work you do, I'd like an update to be made where the number of skills of weapons is more equal. Some lines have 8 choices between Q, W, and E, some have less. Maces and bows only have 7 and crossbows only 6. Yes, this is something that we are always working on. We are always, when we have the opportunity, try to fill up weapon lines that don't have that many spell choices yet. We typically try to do it to make an outdated weapon line more viable in various contents, but that is something that you can look forward to, that we will always do to kind of catch up with the other lines. Add a luck or agility parameter that allows normal blows to be avoided. Yeah, thank you for the suggestion, but I and the design team actually think that that would be a terrible idea. One of the premises we have for our combat system is that it is predictable as much as it can be and has as little luck involved as possible. So yeah, while that might be cool to have the occasional lucky event, I think the majority of players probably wouldn't enjoy this. But please let me know if you have a different opinion. My suggestions are: we have royal armor, royal shoes, but why no royal cape and royal weapons? Looking forward to see royal weapon and royal capes in the future. We're also looking forward to seeing those in the future. Can't tell you when yet, but they're definitely coming at some point. Hello! I would like you to add a new branch, the Necromancy branch. It would be a very novel branch since no free game has it or uses it. You could configure it to summon skeletons, dungeon bats, and other champions or creatures that already exist in the game. We would absolutely love to add a necromancy weapon. The challenge is that we also really like our large battle performance. And the issue there is that if you can actually summon any kind of creature, we have to expect that you are going to do that in large-scale fights. And unfortunately, all the information about what your creatures are doing and how they're engaging in the fight have to be sent to every single player in that fight. And if we imagine a multiplication, that means, let's say there's 300 people in that fight, and they're all close to your creature, that means 300 people have to receive that information. And if you can have multiple ones of this is a huge multiplier. And essentially, in terms of data being sent, a mob is similarly complex to a player. And that means for every summoned creature we would add to the fights, we would essentially be reducing the number of supported players in a large fight and would have to have lower cluster caps. And that is not viable. There are obviously workarounds. We could make it so that the summon creatures you have aren't actually synchronized on other clients. You can't actually really fight them or something like that. We could just visualize them. But I don't think that would really satisfy the players, such as yourself. Need an IP cap for mists like Corrupted Dungeons. I don't want to be killed by 4.1 rats. Well, typically when people ask for an IP cap for Mist, they're asking more for a higher end cap, not a lower end entry requirement, unless we've been getting that feedback wrong. I think the solution here is not to restrict the gear or the entry, because we feel that would take away from the open world feeling, but to think about why are ratting situations happening that frequently. And that has to do with the player density in the Mists. The challenge with changing the player density is that we also would have to tune down the rewards. Otherwise, we would spike up the rewards for everybody else and then flooding the game economy again. So yeah, we're looking into options for tweaking the Mists to make like these ratting third-party situations less frequent or less of a thing. It's not entirely preventable as long as we keep the Mists open, but I don't think we can find a satisfactory lower entry level point that still feels like it's an actual kind of open world experience. Combat and items balance. Some weapons are not even playable, make every item unique and interesting and useful to at least one feature. That is our goal. It is often overlooked where some item is currently good. It is also very challenging to do, because we have far more items than we have actual specific use cases. And that means it's very hard to say like this item is good in this use case, this item is good in this use case, because they all compete with each other then, and then they have to kind of be balanced, and it's a vast array of combinations that you have to oversee for balancing, which is one of the challenges of these you are what you wear systems, and one of the reasons why this sort of thing barely gets done by anybody in the industry, because most people who are developing this sort of game would say it's insane to try to build such a vast balancing system and such an open system. But we think it's exciting. The downside is you will always get moments in the game where certain items are not meta, are not useful. We're constantly working on it, and we're never happy if items are not in a good place. We need a grace period when joining a random group in lethal zones so they don't leave and kill us immediately. I agree. This is something that we're looking into generally, a little bit expansion of topic here. One thing we're thinking about is how can we make it more attractive for people to transition into the black zone, because we have a very sharp divide in the game between people who never want to go into a PvP zone and then the people who do regularly go into the PvP zone. And it feels like a huge step going into the black zone for new players many times. So our idea is to make collaboration in the black zone more feasible. And part of that is changing the way that disbanding groups work, where you don't immediately become hostile, so that there is a chance to kind of see the betrayal and at least try to escape. That is just one piece of the puzzle, however. I think you need more to generally make this viable. But it's a good suggestion, and it's something that we're looking into at the moment. So here's a comment. I'd really love to see a more fleshed out group dungeon experience, be it more enemy types and bosses, new tile sets, variants, and other ways to spice things up. It's the most fun I've had with my friends in the game, and while I do understand the emphasis on guild versus guild, it'd be neat to have a space where both PvP and PvE enjoyers get a lot of value and variety from their time. Yeah, nothing against that. We will add more dungeon content continuously, more enemies over time. The challenge, I think, is that there is a lot of work involved in actually making like a full-on new experience. So the impact on the game is actually relatively small for a large amount of effort. So with the same effort that we can invest into like a whole weapon line or a whole new gear line, we can probably make like one dungeon full of new enemies. And as long as that dungeon doesn't really add anything new to the game, it's probably just a visual teaser, which would be cool. But you don't really get a lot of new gameplay, systemic gameplay out of it, I'd say. But we will continuously add new enemies to kind of spice up the experience. I'd say first, though, we want to revisit the role of solo random dungeons, group random dungeons, static dungeons, to really make sure that this content gets actually played enough. Compared to the Miscs, we feel that the emphasis of the game is quite heavily on the Miscs right now, and we'd really love to get more people back into the open world, into these types of content. And then I think it makes sense to also expand on that content. Unsure if it's been said, too busy to scroll for it, but I and many others would like a sort of summoning ritual type thing for Hellgates, but for corrupted dungeons instead. Oh, so basically the maps that we have for Hellgates, you'd love for corrupted dungeons instead, and we think that's doable and have put that on our list of things to do. And you can look forward to that. A move all button to move all your inventory to a chest, not necessarily to be able to loot, just when you're at a chest that you own, you can move it quickly. Yeah, I'll bring that up with the UI team. I think the main challenge here is always finding a good place for that button, where it logically makes sense. Everybody can intuitively understand it. What does the button do? But there's also space somewhere in the UI. Add more advanced screen pings like League of Legends, attack here, retreat, defend, go there, danger. Yes, also something we talked about internally, also something on our to-do list. The bigger challenge to understand here, though, is obviously we're not League of Legends in terms of player count, and I'm sure you expect this to work in fights of hundreds and hundreds of people. And that information has to get sent to hundreds and hundreds of people, which means we have to consider that we don't overload, sending that information with too much detail to everybody. And so there's a little bit of detail involved here, but it's something we've had on our list for quite a while. And I'm sure we'll get to it eventually. I can't tell you where it's in the priority of the UI team at the moment though. The ability to make the chat box black. Depending on where you are in the game, it's hard to read. So I guess you're asking for the ability to make it full black. I do believe we have the ability to control the transparency. Maybe we need to just allow a higher range for that. We forward that to the UI team. The ability to see and search all inventories from one place. We have that on our list as a thing we want to do. It's quite a big feature technically because all your inventories technically live on different servers. You would need to have a way of searching all these servers. But it's on our list and I'm absolutely sure it will come eventually. I can't tell you right now when though. Let me ping on the map so that my party can see it on the terrain in front of them. Would make clear communication so much easier. You know what? I think that's a really cool idea. I'll forward that. Update suggestion, hide others in the city on PC too, not only on mobile. It's been requested many times. It goes on to our list for the maintenance update or the improvements update. Would be nice to have some more optional colors for the cursor. Gold is hard to see in the Avalon roads, blue is difficult in snowy areas, standard one is not better. Which color would you like? Add a range radius indicator to all skills that have a range that deactivates them. I loved adding the range for the invisibility with ambush, but also Mistwalker shoes with the teleport back to the starting location. Requires a similar range visualization. Otherwise, it's impossible to use the max range effectively. That's a good suggestion, I'll forward it. I don't know if it's easy to add in all cases. It might sometimes be technically challenging, but in the cases where it's easy, we should definitely do it. Please give us the ability to customize our button placement for mobile users. Thank you. I have good news for you. The mobile team is working on a prototype of this. I don't quite know what state it's in at the moment, when it will be ready for release, but it's in the works. Can you add spectating ally when you're dead in the crystal arena? Why am I staring at a black screen for 15 seconds? You know what? With the new custom match mode, I will have to ask the programmers if that code is transferable for this use case. If it is, it might be something that we can add. Sounds cool. Why does the Albion on PC FOV much higher compared to mobile, or is it just me? I guess you're saying, why is the FOV wider on the PC than on mobile? Well, it shouldn't be. The mobile version by default is zoomed in more closely on your character so you can see more closely what's going on when you're starting the game. But you should be able to pinch and zoom out and you get to the same FOV as you can get on the PC, especially if you have a widescreen mobile device. Can you add a graphic preset, a fast way to change to a specific preset? I think that would be a wonderful thing for a player who plays multiple contents. Yeah, I think that's a good suggestion and should go on to our polishing list of quality of life features. Display the inspected player IP on an item, not yours. It's counterintuitive. You're absolutely correct. It should probably say the inspected players. The problem is that the UI is kind of generic and it always shows yours, because in a lot of other circumstances, or rather let's say, you don't actually see anywhere where that UI comes from. But yeah, I'll forward this to the UI team and we'll see if we can make this case intuitive. So this comment is asking for the option to add a marked symbol such as a crown on the name tag so you can follow the healer or the shot caller in ZVZ fights more easily. That is something we are aware of and that we have on the to-do list for our UI team. They're working on it. I hope we can bring it with the following update. Obviously not the Foundations update, it's still in work, but the one following. So here's one: boat trips, boat transports, and boat fights. I do actually have a full concept for naval expansion to Albion Online. We've never pulled the trigger on it because, well, we feel there's so much to do on the main game. And before we add an entire kind of secondary game next to it, we'd really love to still address a lot of the challenges with the existing systems and pull the existing game more together before we go out and do something crazy. Is there any way at all to add 3 versus 3 content? I think a large portion of the player base would enjoy it. I don't know if it's Arena or if it's Hellgates or what you're looking for, but I'm assuming it's some kind of structured PvP in 3 versus 3. The challenge is always we have a game that has a lot of content and we have to observe population size. Every kind of division we add diminishes the pool of people that play it. And at the moment, while there are some places where this might be viable, for example, in the Misc, it would potentially be viable in terms of player counts. In Hellgates, for example, it currently isn't. If we make sure that the particular feature is healthy enough in terms of player base, then adding 3v3 is something that we'll definitely consider. But focusing on certain player group or group sizes is always a tool for us to control the population within a feature and make sure that you get matches and activity in it. I love these dev talks. I want them to be more frequent. Well, thank you. But I really do them when I think I have something meaningful to say. I don't want to, have you listen to me ramble like you're doing right now. I really want to use them to present something when I think we have something cool to talk about. Here's an idea: have earnable cosmetics. Yes, we have some of those. I don't know if that's what you mean, but for example, in the Crystal Arena, you can earn some cosmetics that are exclusive to that content. And we do actually currently have plans to expand on this quite a bit, and we'll soon be able to talk about it, and I'm quite excited about it. Hey, could you add performance updates that help people with low resource setups? With the new visual changes, there will be difficulties for many players. Not sure what new visual changes you're talking about. I mean, we're constantly working on performance. Having an MMO with all these different equipments, all these players, and also having the challenge of the perspective where you don't really have distance. So you can't really do a traditional LOD where you would just like scale down the fidelity of things if it's in the distance. Unfortunately means that there is a certain challenge and overhead, but performance is a key thing we're optimizing for constantly. On mobile devices, we're particularly optimizing for memory as well. But if you do have particular performance point where like this thing is dragging down performance, then please point it out. Because we typically pick up those comments, we look into it. So it might be a particular spell that has a particularly high fidelity VFX that might need to be toned down or whatever it is. But do please point out in what situations are you primarily experiencing performance issues and where are they affecting you the most. We cannot make the game perform well on super low-end devices in very large-scale fights. That is just the nature of having a lot of characters with unique animations, unique gear sets, and all of these things at once. We could, however, consider, if that is a topic, whether we can scale down the fidelity in these fights, right? Like we could say options to remove animations from characters if certain criteria are met or whatever. But we do need you to point out what particular situations are affecting you most, and then we can focus on them. Rework the mounts. The game still feels like there's only 5 to 6 mounts. I would say if there's 5 to 6 mount categories, that's actually quite a large amount of mounts because we have them on all tiers. So actually it's like almost 30 models of different mounts just for the base, and then you have all of the skins on top. We do want to rework the mounts soon. We want to make more base types available, just generally give you more options for what you want to play sort of as your standard mount, and not only limit that to horses and swift claws, but open up wolves, bears, and boars at the very least. The challenge with constantly adding new mounts, of course, is that every single mount has to have its kind of role in the game. And actually, we feel we probably need to bring the things together a bit more to actually make it a bit more the player's choice which mount they want to play, because otherwise you just have the one perfect mount for each kind of situation. And there aren't that many different use cases for mounts, right? The original plan was to have one mount for every kind of specialized situation, but it turns out for the majority, people want a mount that moves fast. And if that's the only thing the only dimension, there isn't that much room for having all these different variety of mounts. But that's something we will look into, and we definitely have the plan of making more mount types viable. But I'd rather say more on having different rare mounts more available on more tiers, so you have a more viable choice for playing wolves, for example, or bears and so on. Hey SBA, how about bringing extreme weather conditions to the maps? Think about shooting lightning and fighting or trying to survive in the cold. Yes, I have thought about that in the past, and I would have loved to do that. But I think in reality, there would be a lot of people annoyed about being unable to move properly in a cold environment when they're just trying to get from one place to the other, or I don't know, having lightning interrupt their battle. It sounds like a really cool idea, but Albion isn't a survival game for you as an individual player, but serving many, many, many players at once. And it will be very challenging to have a weather system that at the same time delivers the sort of immersive experience you're looking for, and at the same time is compatible with all the different systems that we have in the game and all of the stuff that can happen on a map. But it would be cool. And if there's ever an opportunity, I'd love to do it. I would like to see open world quests, solos and groups anywhere, and also more backslots. My main question for that is, what do you want to get out of those quests? Like, I've thought about adding storyline quests to the game, but the experience from other MMOs says unless there are significant rewards attached, people don't play storyline quests, or at least they don't. A lot of people are not very interested in storyline quests. So yeah, we'd have to come up with some reason to play that content. What would you expect to be seeing there? Because Albion, all items are player made. So it wouldn't necessarily be gear rewards like in other MMORPGs. Be interesting to hear your thoughts if you had any ideas for rewards. Gathering, please. Specking gathering is hard AF. There's a bit of a debate here. Internally, we're having that debate. On the one hand side, obviously, it'd be cool to have gathering be kind of smooth and easy to do. On the other hand, the more we make gathering accessible through ease of leveling, the more gatherers will actively be competing, and the more sort of non-focused gatherers will also be able to gather the resources, making resources scarcer for all of the gatherers. And we can't just up the amounts, because then we're collapsing the global economy. So I don't see us currently changing the gathering too much. We might look into making it somewhat easier at some point, but I don't want to commit to that. It's an ongoing and lengthy internal discussion about what the right thing to do here is to protect the effort of gathering, or to make it more accessible to more players. Give us your thoughts. What do you think? Should gathering be easier to level, or should it stay the way it is? Change the city plot system. It's literally impossible for other people to own a city plot when people with multiple alt accounts with billions monopolize the entire city for months or years if they have to. Yes, this is something we're looking into. The goal that we're pursuing is making it harder to actually monopolize the plots in that way. I can't give more details at the moment, but we're looking into this right now. Well, this was a first attempt at doing this type of video. It became very long, so apologies for that. But what do you think? Should we do more like this when we have Dev Talk releases? Should we have reacts to your comments? If so, what would you like to see for those? It was an interesting experience from my side. Thank you very much for watching. See you next time.